Well, hi ladies, it's Wednesday morning again, and I want you to know I miss you. And I'm an introvert, I like my alone time, and I still miss you. So just know that I wish you were here with me, but I hope you enjoy our time together this morning. I'm gonna make a couple quick announcements and then I will move in, but can you do me a favor while I'm making these announcements, grab your Bible study book and grab your Bible. So I wanted to let you know, hopefully at this point you have been contacted by your table leader and you have the redemption code to look at the last 3 videos on the Lifeway website. If you may have noticed that next to some of those videos it says that the video expires on April 4th. And I did talk to Lifeway this morning to find out what the deal was with that. They told me that that may just be a glitch. We may be able to click on that video after April 4th and it will work just fine. If not, then I will be able to call Lifeway, get a new redemption code. We will disseminate that out to you again through our table leaders, and you will have more time to watch the video. So don't stress out if you see that the expiration date is April 4th, which is coming up pretty quickly. But I do want to encourage you, please continue on with your study. For sure, watch the videos. I definitely want to recommend watching session 7, which is the one after this study that we're finishing up today. It is on one of the most well-known passages of 2 Corinthians 12:9. It's when Jesus says to Paul, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in your weakness." And I know for myself, that was a lifeline verse for me, especially when I was raising kids when they were younger. I remember really feeling like I was ruining my kids. And I want you to know, if you're a young mom and you feel that way, it's very common to feel that way. And I certainly did. I felt like everything I did just backfired. And you may need to know that right now because you might be at your wit's end. And so I just want to encourage you that we have all felt those moments of despair as moms, feeling like we're not doing anything right. But just know that God's grace is sufficient for you and His power will be made perfect in your weakness. And definitely watch session 7. It'll be a good encouragement for you. So all that to say, I watched session 7 at home and I thought to myself, what can I possibly say that Kelly Minter didn't already say in that video? It was so good. And so I just sat down and I read through 2 Corinthians again, just the book as a whole, and tried to find something that sort of rose to the surface that maybe we haven't talked about that much yet. And so I have to be honest with you, I have found 2 Corinthians to be sort of a hard book to study. I feel like Paul is a little disjointed in his thoughts. I feel like he throws a lot of topics at us. And so it's been one of the more difficult books for me to study, at least a New Testament epistle it has been. But one of the things that we can see for sure is that Paul has had a really rough history with the people of the church of Corinth. And so I think we'll talk a little bit about what we can take away from Paul and his relationship with the people of his church. And so just to start off with, I want to ask you to grab your Bible study book right here and turn to page 13. It's right at the beginning. And on page 13, there's a little timeline on the right-hand side of the page. And this is just a great reminder for those of us who have done the study. It's been a while, and maybe there's some of you who are jumping in with us, and so you don't really have any background on the book of Corinthians, and you would just maybe benefit from a little context here. So I just want to run you through some of the stuff that led up and into this book, this 2 Corinthians letter. So that first dash in that timeline on page 13, it says that during his second missionary journey that Paul spent 18 months in Corinth, and that's when he established the Corinthian church. And we read about that in Acts chapter 18, verse 1. And so that first dash, that's when he establishes the church in Corinth. Then he leaves the Corinth and he goes to Ephesus for 3 years. And at some point, he wrote the Corinthian church an instructive letter. And this letter is not in the Bible, which is super confusing. Scholars don't really know what prompted the letter, but we know that Paul addressed some problems that had begun to exist in the church. And so that second dash, we find out that Paul writes an instructive letter, but that letter has been lost. Paul finds out after this lost letter was sent to the church in Corinth that it was not received well by the people. He had received reports that the people had misunderstood his letter, that there were all kinds of problems plaguing the church, We can infer what the problems were when we read 1 Corinthians, that there was division, there was sexual immorality in the church, there was snobbery and confusion about marriage and divorce and how to participate in worship. And so all of this led Paul to write a second letter to the church in Corinth, but that is actually 1 Corinthians in our Bible. And so he hits on a lot of these topics. And I really can't imagine being Paul and being hit with all of these different topics to untangle and talk about and having to write it all in a letter. But in any event, that third dash on that page is when Paul writes a second letter to the church in Corinth, but it's really 1 Corinthians in our Bible. Then Paul decides that he's going to visit the Corinthian church for a second time to sort of personally resolve some of these issues. But unfortunately, this second visit to the church in Corinth is super painful, super sorrowful. Paul has a terrible time trying to reach the hearts of these people. And so he basically leaves. And so that's the fourth dash, is this sorrowful visit that Paul has with the church of Corinth. So he's kind of run out of town by this Corinthian church. And so he decides to write another letter. He writes this painful letter. He's very discouraged, and he writes it in response to this terrible visit that he had with the church in Corinth. And so this is the sorrowful letter, another one that is lost that we don't have anymore, but Paul references this in chapter 2, verse 4. Okay, so then Paul sends Titus to Corinth to kind of find out how are they doing, and he hears back that most of the church has repented, that there's still a rebellious minority, but that in general they're doing better. And so that prompts Paul to write 2 Corinthians, and that's finally where we are. That's the book that we are studying right now. And so 2 Corinthians is really the fourth letter that Paul has written to the church in Corinth, and he writes it in anticipation of this third visit. And so that's the sixth dash in this timeline. And then the last dash is when Paul finally makes his third and final visit to the church of Corinth. And it's kind of cool that at this time when he is in Corinth and he's visiting them, he actually writes the book of Romans, which is neat because we're studying Romans on Sunday mornings. And so you can realize that as Paul's writing some of this stuff in the first chapter of Romans, that he's probably looking around at this Corinthian church and using these people as his case study, because he has seen full well of what division, what sin can do to the hearts and minds of people. And so he's using these people around him as an example as he's writing through Romans. So anyhow, it's clear to see through this timeline and reading 2 Corinthians in general that Paul had a rough time with his church family. There was lots of misunderstandings, there was hurt feelings, there was division, there was tension, there was angst. But what I pulled away from this as I was reading it that day on my couch is that Paul demonstrated an amazing amount of tenacity and determination when he was ministering to these people in Corinth. Paul understood three paramount truths, and those are the three truths that we're just going to talk about for a little bit this morning. The three things are this. Paul knew that people are important to God. Paul knew that he was going to need God's strength to minister to those people that God loved. And Paul knew that loving people was really hard to do. And so we're just going to talk about those three kind of concepts, and hopefully that will help you and encourage you during this time. So the first thing is that Paul knew that people are important to God. And if you read, some of you might be familiar with this passage, but in Matthew 22, Jesus tells us what the greatest commandment is. He says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, your mind, your soul, and your strength. And then he says that the second commandment is to love your neighbor as yourself. And I don't know about you, but the first commandment seems a lot easier to me than the second commandment. It's pretty easy for me to love the Lord, my God, with all my heart, mind, soul, and strength, because God's always faithful, and he's always loving, and he always understands, and he always comes through, and he always forgives. And so it's pretty easy for me to put my energy into loving him because he deserves it in my mind. It's not so easy for me to put my energy into the second commandment, which is love my neighbor as myself, because people are annoying at times, and they let you down, and they disappoint you, and they're ungrateful and selfish and lazy and mean and unfaithful, and there's a lot of different reasons when I can get down on people. And so sometimes I don't feel like people deserve my energy as much as God deserves my energy and love. But honestly, that's not the right mindset for me to have at all. I need to be loving the people that God created like he wants me to. And so that's what Jesus was telling us in Matthew 22, that people are a priority to him. They're the pinnacle of his creation here on earth, and we are all made in the image of God, and we all have value and purpose. God tells us that his church is this living organism of people. The church isn't a building, the church isn't a business, the church isn't just a program, but the church is a family, and we are all part of God's family. And just as God didn't give up on us, we don't want to give up on one another. And so God wants us to understand that people come before our own individual plans, our own individual comfort, our dreams, our emotions, that we need to prioritize them. So I think that Paul has this amazing tenacity and determination as he's serving the Corinthian church is because he has rightly aligned his priorities with God's priorities. I mean, you could take a piece of paper out and you could read 2 Corinthians and you could fill up that page with all of the hardships that Paul endured serving the people that God loves. It says that he endured beatings and stonings and imprisonments and riots. He fought fear all the time because he was in constant danger. He went through shipwrecks. He had oftentimes no food. He didn't have a place to sleep. He was cold. He didn't have creature comforts. Paul endured all of these things for a lot of years because he felt that he needed to bring the gospel to the people that God loved. And because God loved these people, Paul loved these people. And so I was thinking, how can we learn from that given this situation? Because I don't know about you, but I'm kind of an orderly person. I like to get things done. If I have something hard that I have to get done, I just want to get it done. I want to knock it out so I don't have to think about it anymore. And so for me, if I have a limited amount of time, then usually tasks are going to kind of take priority over people. And so I can oftentimes neglect people for tasks. But during this quarantine, most of us have been given full permission by our government, in fact, to spend more time at home and to spend more time with the people that we live with. Now, I want to say that that isn't for everyone, and I want to always remember our healthcare professionals and those who are doing the trucking and taking care of the safety of our community. There's a lot of people who haven't been given the ability to be at home. But in general, most of us have been sent home to spend time at home for that reason. And so this is a great opportunity for you to just ask yourself, who has God placed in your life to enjoy and to influence? Who are the people that God has put under your roof that you are going to be spending a lot of time with? And I purposely say enjoy as well as influence because I think sometimes we consider people as projects and we forget that they are, whether or not they follow Christ, they are image bearers of God and they have amazing gifts and talents that we can enjoy. And my son and I were talking about that just recently. He was telling me about all the different people that he's met in college and how, they all just have amazing stories and talents and that he's gotten a lot of enjoyment in meeting these people, whether or not they're followers of Christ is not always a factor of just enjoying people and enjoying all that they add to his life. And so I want to just remind you and remind me, we need to enjoy the people that God has put in our life. It's also a time where we can reprioritize being at home during quarantine. About a week ago, I was at a gas station with actually my other son. He was filling up his car with gas. And I said to him, I'm going to go run into the, whatever it's called, the gas station grocery store. What is that called? Like the mini mart? I'm going to run in there really quick and I'm going to see if they have any milk because we had no milk. And as you know, back then, a couple weeks ago, there was no milk to be had in the grocery stores. And so I ran into the mini mart and yes, lo and behold, there were 2 things of milk. I only took one. I want y'all to know I left one for somebody else. But I took 1 gallon of milk and I bought it at the convenience store at the grocery store. And I was so excited about getting this 1 gallon of milk, and totally made my day that I got some milk. So that's a tip, quick tip for you guys. If you're looking for milk, you might want to just go to the gas station and check and see if they have one in the cooler in there. But I was just thinking to myself, normally I would never buy milk in a gas station convenience store. It's probably overpriced. It's probably not the brand that my son likes to drink, but whatever. You know, it's different priorities right now during quarantine. And so for you guys, you might have some different priorities as well. And so as you kind of change or reprioritize during this quarantine time, I just want you to think about where are you prioritizing people in that. You know, we want to make sure that we're making people a priority in our life. And so when you prioritize about the people in your life, you're going to be evaluating what's most important. And you can't do everything, right? Because we just don't have limitless energy. So when we prioritize, we want to set our expectations around our priorities. And so if you're going to prioritize people as being kind of top priority right now, you're probably going to have to lower your expectations in some other areas of your life. And so I just want to encourage you, like, look around your house, look at who you have in your life, make spending time with them a priority because people are a priority to God, and also give yourself permission to lower your expectations in other parts of your life. I'll tell you just on a personal note, I know that if I'm going to get snarky as a mom or as a wife, it's because my expectations weren't met in some way. And so sometimes I can just be in a bad mood just because something didn't go the way that I had planned. And I just want to encourage you and encourage myself that we need to lower our expectations during this time and just try to hang on to what was a success and let go of what flopped, what didn't work out as well. And social media is a great tool. You guys are getting ideas from one another, and I love seeing some of the things that you guys are doing with your kids. You know, I saw Amy taking her girls for a walk. They walked their cat. That sounds fun in the neighborhood. I saw Randy's been doing face painting on her little boys' faces, and so it's super fun to like get on social media and get ideas. But like, if social media makes you feel like a loser because you're not doing those things, then just don't get on social media. Just do what you can do that day and set your expectations lower than you want, because I don't want you to walk around and just feel like you have to do everything perfectly. If you prioritize the people in your life to be top priority, then lower the expectations in other areas of your life. I think your kids are probably going to remember the vibe and the feeling of quarantine more than what they actually did. And so just remember that, you know, years from now, they're going to kind of remember how they felt, not necessarily what they accomplished. Also, I just want to encourage you, maybe there's someone in your house who's, you know, your relationship's kind of strained with them for some reason, and so you just kind of feel like you don't know where to start. I just want to encourage you, maybe use this time to just understand them better. You know, observe them. Sometimes we're so distracted getting all the things done and running all of the errands that we kind of don't even pay attention to some of our kids, especially if they're a little bit older and they can kind of take care of themselves. But this is a great time to just observe them. Just what's important to them? How do they spend their time? What do they do? What do they not do? If they allow you to have a conversation with them, if that comes up, then ask them questions. Instead of asking them questions so that you can give them advice, just ask them questions so that you can find out about their perspective and find out about what's going on in their heart and in their mind. And so you can use this time as well just to get to understand the people in your life better. I also just want to say, for those of you, because I know I've talked a lot about people who have families at home, a lot of you might live alone. And Paul, it sounds like, lived alone. There's a passage in 1 Corinthians 7:8, and he makes reference to being single. And so scholars don't know if he's always been single or if maybe he was married at one point and then was single, but for whatever reason, when he was ministering to this Corinthian church, it sounds like he lived alone. And yet Paul had an amazing influence on the people that God had put in his life. And so I just want to encourage you, you know, here at Central, our motto is transforming families to live and love like Jesus. And whether or not you have an individual family in your home, you are part of our church family. And so as part of our church family, we need to encourage each other to be transformed, to live and love like Jesus as a church family. I'm going rogue right now, but I'm just going to say, like, my friend Cheryl, I saw her in the parking lot this morning or in the courtyard as I got here to do this taping. And it just made me think, Cheryl has been kind of a mama bear for our staff over this time, because everything, as you can tell, has been changed. We've had to figure out how to do everything digitally, and everything's new, and none of us know exactly how to do everything or if we're doing it the right way. And so much information is being funneled through Cheryl, and she is having to kind of direct. Everything that's going on. She's playing a really critical role for our church family right now. And she is demonstrating tenacity and determination, and she is helping our church family during this time. Another thing you can always do if you're home alone is pray. Pray for us. It's the most powerful thing that we can do as Christians. And the cool thing is as long as you're conscious, you can pray. It doesn't matter. You can do it from your bed, from your lazy boy chair. You can do it from your car when you're walking around your neighborhood. There's so many things that you can be praying for right now, for our community, for our church, for our world. And so there are things that you can do for people even if you are home alone. Okay, so the first thing is people are God's priority. The next two things are going to go really fast. The other thing I pulled from reading 2 Corinthians again is that Paul knew that he needed God's strength to minister to those that he loves. And I kind of made a note as I was skimming through 2 Corinthians again, that Paul talks a lot about being weak. In 2 Corinthians 1:9, he says, indeed, I'm blinded by the light. I have to look down at my Bible now. Okay, in 2 Corinthians 1:9, Paul says, indeed, we felt that we had received the sentence of death, but that was to make us rely not on ourselves, but in God who raises the dead. This idea that Paul knows that he's weak, but God is strong. He says again in 1 Corinthians 3:5, not that we are sufficient in ourselves to claim anything as coming from us, but our sufficiency comes from God. He says something again in chapter 4, verse 7. He says, but we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that the surpassing power belongs to God and not to us. And then he says in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 9 and 10, that Jesus said to him, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. So Paul is super clear that he needs God's strength to minister to the people of Corinth. And you get to know Paul by reading his letters, and you realize Paul was a pretty passionate guy. And I know some passionate people. I've got a few of those in my life. And passionate people, they say what they think. Their emotions get the best of them sometimes. And I'm sure that Paul did not handle everything perfectly as he was ministering to the Corinthian church. And I'm sure there were times when he had to apologize. But I just want you to be encouraged by this. When you have people in your home, if you have an ugly moment with someone, it doesn't mean that your relationship with that person is doomed. It certainly happened to Paul in the church in Corinth. It didn't doom their relationship. It was just a part of the process. Also, it says that Paul was prompted by the Lord not to go back to Corinth when he thought he should. He went to Macedonia instead. It was like Paul was told by God, just give that a little bit of time. I think let's go this direction and not go back to the church in Corinth for a while. And I think that, again, that can just encourage us that when you're in a heated moment with someone, sometimes it's okay just to take a step back. Maybe you can be like Paul and just press pause on that. And you don't have to leave a situation with someone in your home being right. Maybe what you need to do is just give everybody a chance to settle down and to rest. And the great news of the quarantine, ladies, is tomorrow you can just do it again, because you're not going anywhere and they're not going anywhere. So if you have kind of a tense moment with one of your kids or one of your family members, maybe the better thing to do is just press pause on that. Everybody go decompress and come back to that later. One thing that also popped into my head is Paul wanted every individual in the Corinthian church to develop a personal, intimate relationship with God, because that's what Paul had himself. And I'm sure that you want that for the people in your home. And in order to allow that personal, intimate relationship between a person and God to develop, is we don't want to insert ourselves as a third party in that personal, intimate relationship between a person and God. And so sometimes I think we do need to give people time to be alone and just to introspectively kind of think about things, just them and the Lord, and let the time kind of go by and let God do his work. And so just remember that. You don't always have to be in there and fixing it right then and there. Sometimes it's okay to just take a break. The last truth is this, that loving people is hard. And we know that. When I was reading 2 Corinthians, like I keep saying, I just kind of read through it, I was looking for repetitive words. This is what I found. This is all about Paul, right? Paul and his church plant. And these are the words that I found repetitively in 2 Corinthians. Affliction, 11 times. Suffering, 4 times. He used multiple uses of words like despair, anguish, pain, and guilt. I mean, it was so depressing, it kind of made me laugh in a sick way. It's like these are not the kind of words that you would think about when you're talking about planning a church with people, and yet it's kind of the reality is people are messy and they cause us to experience pain and suffering at times. And no doubt this Corinthian church had disappointed Paul. They had rejected him. They seemed like they were pretty ungrateful and disloyal. They attacked him personally. They accused him of not being sincere. They accused him of not having the ability to lead them. They were kind of infatuated with other false teachers. So Paul was going through a lot. And so words like that kind of make sense. But another word that you hear Paul use over and over is the word comfort. He uses comfort 10 times in the first 7 verses. I mean, that's a lot of times to use one word, right? And then he uses comfort again in the closing of 2 Corinthians. And so I think what you can kind of take away from the use of those words is that Paul experienced great affliction from serving these people, but he also experienced great comfort from the Lord while he was doing it. And ladies, as you are serving and loving those people in your home, and those times when you have a day and you're like, yeah, I could describe my day using the same words, affliction, suffering, pain, just go to the Lord for your comfort. You're going to have to go to God to kind of recharge. You're going to have to sort of lay your needs on the Lord sometimes. The people around you are not designed to meet every need that you have. They will just crush down under the weight of it because we're not designed to meet every single need of every person. So when you feel a little spent, you have to go to the Lord for that, just like Paul did. Take time every day and spend time with God and his word. It is a really good use of your time. I know you're going to have a lot of things that you're going to have to coordinate with the kids and the school and working from home and finding the milk and all of the things that we're going to have to be doing during this quarantine time. But take time to spend with the Lord every day. It's going to be well worth the investment. I'll just close with a quick story. When I was thinking about this idea of taking time every day to spend with the Lord and that's a good use of our time, it made me think of my sister, and I had to call her to get the details because I had vaguely remembered it. But she told me about this time. She ran 2 marathons. The first marathon she ran, she just sort of ran the whole thing without stopping. And I'm sure she did great. She's a good runner. The second time she ran the marathon, she decided to listen to the instruction of some trainers. And so what she did is she trained differently. Every single mile that she ran, she would walk for 30 seconds. And she did this while she was training, and then she did this during the race. And she was telling me that it seemed super counterintuitive, especially during the race, right? Because, you run 1 mile in a 26-mile race. You really aren't expecting people to stop and start walking after 1 mile. And she said she felt kind of lame because she had stopped and she would walk for 30 seconds after mile 1. And all these hordes of people were just blowing past her, right? And mile 2, she stopped. And mile 2, 3, 4, 5, she's stopping and she's walking for 30 seconds. But she said what happened is in miles 11 and 12 and 13 and 14 and 15, all of a sudden, even though she was stopping and walking 30 seconds, she started passing the people that blew past her earlier on in the race. And she felt great. She had a ton of energy. She was doing great. She just kept walking her 30 seconds every mile. By the time she got to like mile 22 and 23 and 24 and people were, looking like they were about to collapse, she still had so much energy. She was able to just be encouraged, say encouraging things to these people. And she ran that race and she never lost any energy. In fact, she said she almost gained, her miles went faster as the race went by because she took that 30 seconds of every mile. And she ended up doing a great job. I think she qualified for the Boston Marathon in that race. And it just made me think about our own life, is we might think that we're losing momentum by stopping and slowing down and spending a few minutes with the Lord. But I think that time, ladies, is well spent. It's going to give you the endurance to get through each day with grace, to get through each day with good perspective, and to be able to make people a priority in your life. And so that's what I have for you today. I hope that was encouraging for you. Remember, keep people a priority. Make sure that you're tapping into God's strength every day. And remember that loving people is not easy. You are going to have to lower your expectations at times. And remember, everything that you do, whether or not the people around you appreciate it, God sees your effort. God will honor your effort. All right? I love you. I miss you. And I'll see you next week.